Emma stood outside the glass tower of Sterling Enterprises, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The cream envelope in her trembling hands felt heavier than it should, its elegant calligraphy mocking her with every loop and swirl. Marcus Whitmore and Vanessa. Chen requests the pleasure of your company at their wedding. Her ex-fiancé was getting married to the woman he'd left her for, and he'd had the audacity to send her an invitation. Emma had spent 3 sleepless nights debating whether to go, her pride warring with her desire to prove she'd moved on. She'd finally decided that showing up alone would be worse than not showing up at all, which was why she now found herself about to do the most reckless thing she'd ever done. She was going to ask Alexander Sterling, the notoriously cold CEO of the tech empire where she worked as a project coordinator, to be her fake date. They'd never spoken beyond professional pleasantries, but desperation made people brave or stupid, and Emma was betting on the former. The receptionist barely glanced at her as Emma made her way to the executive floor, her heels clicking against the marble with false confidence. Alexander Sterling was a legend in the building, a 34-year-old self-made billionaire who'd built his company from nothing, a man whose piercing blue eyes could freeze water and whose rare smiles were said to be worth their weight in gold. Emma had admired him from afar. Everyone did, but she'd never imagined she'd be knocking on his office door with such an absurd request. When his deep voice called for her to enter, she pushed open the heavy door and stepped into a world of floor-to-ceiling windows, minimalist furniture, and the faint scent of expensive cologne. Alexander sat behind his desk, his dark hair perfectly styled, his tailored suit fitting him like a second skin. He looked up from his laptop, and those infamous blue eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that nearly made her turn and run. "Ms. Chen," he said, and she was surprised he knew her name. "What can I do for you?" Emma's rehearsed speech evaporated from her mind. She stood there frozen until his eyebrow arched slightly in question. The words tumbled out in a rush. "I need a date to my ex's wedding. And I know this is completely inappropriate and you probably think I've lost my mind, but I'm desperate and you're the only person I could think of who might be intimidating enough to make this work, and I promise I'll owe you anything. I'll work weekends, I'll take on extra projects, I'll organize your files for the next year. Just please consider this because I cannot show up alone and watch him marry her without at least pretending that I've moved on with someone." Impressive. She finally ran out of air and stopped, her cheeks burning with mortification. Alexander leaned back in his chair, studying her with an expression she couldn't read. The silence stretched between them like taffy, and Emma was certain he was about to call security. Then impossibly, his lips curved into the smallest hint of a smile. "When is this wedding?" he asked. "Next Saturday," Emma whispered. "Black tie event at the Rosewood Estate." He was quiet for another excruciating moment, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "I'll do it," he finally said, and Emma's knees nearly buckled with relief. "But I have conditions." Of course he did. "Anything," she said quickly. "First, we make this convincing. If we're going to do this, we do it properly. That means you'll need to tell me everything about your ex, about your relationship, about what went wrong. Second, you'll accompany me to my family's charity gala the following weekend. My mother has been relentlessly trying to set me up, and having a girlfriend, even a fake one, will give me some breathing room. And third," he stood walking around his desk with predatory grace, stopping just close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his blue eyes. "No falling in love with me. This is a business arrangement. Pure and simple." Emma should have been offended by his arrogance, but instead she found herself nodding, extending her hand to shake on it. When his warm palm clasped hers, a spark of electricity shot up her arm, and she knew she'd just made either the best or worst decision of her life. "Deal," she said, sealing her fate. The Rosewood Estate was exactly as Emma remembered from when Marcus had first shown her pictures, during their engagement, back when she'd foolishly believed it would be their wedding venue. The sprawling gardens were adorned with thousands of white roses, and the late afternoon sun cast everything in a golden glow that seemed almost cruel in its beauty. She stood at the entrance in a stunning burgundy gown that Alexander had insisted on buying for her, his black card sliding across the boutique counter before she could protest. "If you're going to be my girlfriend, even a fake one, You'll look the part, he said with that enigmatic smile that was becoming dangerously familiar. Now, as his hand settled on the small of her back, warm through the silk fabric, Emma wondered if she'd underestimated how difficult maintaining the fake part would be. They'd spent the past week in what Alexander called preparation sessions, meeting every evening after work to construct their cover story. How they'd met at a company event 6 months ago, how he'd pursued her persistently until she'd finally agreed to dinner, how they'd discovered a shared love of old movies and Italian food. But somewhere between the scripted responses and practiced smiles, something had shifted. Alexander had listened with unexpected gentleness as she'd explained how Marcus had proposed during a sunrise hike, how he'd promised her forever, and how she'd found him in bed with Vanessa just 3 months later. In return, he'd shared pieces of himself, she suspected. Few people ever saw his fear that he'd become too much like his ruthless father, his loneliness at the top, his secret dream of leaving it all behind someday to teach coding to underprivileged kids. The ceremony was torture. Emma watched Marcus stand at the altar, handsome in his tuxedo, smiling at Vanessa with the same adoration he'd once shown her. She felt Alexander's arm tighten around her waist, pulling her closer, and when she glanced up at him, she saw something fierce in his expression, protective and possessive in a way that made her breath catch. "He's an idiot," Alexander whispered against her ear, his breath warm and intoxicating. "Anyone who could walk away from you deserves to spend his life wondering what he lost." Emma's eyes stung with unshed tears. But they weren't for Marcus anymore. The reception was an elegant affair with crystal chandeliers and a live orchestra. Emma had steeled herself for the inevitable encounter, and it came as she and Alexander stood by the bar. "Emma." Marcus's voice was too loud, too jovial, edged with the satisfaction of a man who thought he'd won. Vanessa clung to his arm, her smile sharp as glass. "I'm so glad you could make it." "And this must be your date?" Alexander extended his hand with the cool confidence of someone who owned boardrooms. "Alexander Sterling. And you must be the groom. Congratulations on your marriage." Emma watched Marcus's face pale slightly as recognition dawned. Everyone knew who Alexander Sterling was. "I've heard a lot about you," Alexander continued smoothly, his hand moving to Emma's waist in a gesture of unmistakable claim. Though I confess, hearing Emma's stories, I couldn't quite understand how any man could be foolish enough to lose her. "But," he smiled, and it was all charm and ice, "your loss has been my extraordinary gain." The conversation was mercifully brief, Marcus and Vanessa retreating with forced smiles and tight expressions. Emma felt victorious and hollow all at once, until Alexander turned her toward the dance floor. "Dance with me," he said, and it wasn't quite a question. As they swayed to the orchestra's rendition of an old love song, Emma realized how perfectly she fit against him, how his hand on her back felt like home, how his scent had become as familiar as breathing. "Thank you," she whispered. "For this, for everything." Alexander looked down at her, and something in his expression had changed, softened, become vulnerable in a way that terrified and thrilled her. "Emma," he said quietly, "I need to break one of my rules." Before she could ask which one, his lips were on hers, gentle and seeking and absolutely real. The kiss tasted like champagne and possibility, and when they finally pulled apart, Emma saw her own surprise reflected in his eyes. "I wasn't supposed to fall for you," he admitted, his forehead resting against hers. "This was supposed to be simple, contained, temporary. But somewhere between your nervous rambling in my office and watching you be brave enough to face your past tonight, I forgot it was pretend." Emma's heart soared and plummeted simultaneously. "Your third condition," she reminded him breathlessly, "no falling in love." Alexander smiled, really smiled, and it was more beautiful than she'd imagined. "I'm a CEO," he said. "I'm allowed to revise the terms of an agreement when circumstances change. The question is, are you willing to renegotiate?" Emma thought about Marcus inside, celebrating what he thought was his happiness. She thought about the woman she'd been who would have settled for someone who didn't see her worth, and she looked at the man before her, powerful and vulnerable, who'd agreed to be her fake date, but had stayed for something infinitely more real. "I think," she said, pulling him down for another kiss, "we can work out new terms." as fireworks exploded over the Rosewood estate, celebrating a wedding that no longer mattered. Emma and Alexander stood wrapped in each other's arms, writing the first page of their own love story. Sometimes the best relationships start with a crazy proposition, a fake arrangement, and two people brave enough to admit when something unexpected becomes everything real. Did this ending give you all the feels? If you loved watching Emma and Alexander's fake relationship turn into something beautifully real, subscribe to our channel. Drop a comment telling us your favorite moment. And hit that notification bell so you never miss another romantic story. Your next favorite love story is just one click away. We have so many more tales of unexpected romance, second chances, and love that defies all odds. See you in the next story where love always finds a way.